Hey, yo, welcome to the Godcast.
I hope y'all are buckled up because things are about to get weird.
I don't understand why you chose me.
You want to change the world, son. So do I.
Where are we at in terms of history on the timeline? Where are we exactly? I'm just trying to uncover the truth and bring forth what I can see as the truth. The Bible seemed to be predicting more things than any other conspiracy theory type information, Look, one thing's for certain, that there is so much power in the name of Jesus Christ. That I know for sure.
Welcome to Godcast.
Welcome to Godcast.
The Goodness Over Darkness.
The Goodness Over Darkness podcast.
Here is your host.
Here's your host, Emmanuel Kingman.
Emmanuel Kingman.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
Welcome to the light.
It's showtime. What is going on, everybody? I'm your host, Emmanuel Kingman, and with me, once again, because she wasn't here in the last intro, is my beautiful, lovely partner, Mimi.
Hello.
Hello, Mimi. How are you?
I'm freezing.
I know it is a little chilly back here, but you seem to be much colder than I am at the moment.
Shivering.
Yes, with your blanket and jacket.
Chattering.
On today's show, I had on, well, Mimi wasn't here for the interview. She has been busy. But for the interview itself, it was me and Gary Wayne was the special guest.
I can't believe I missed this. I really can't believe I missed this. So I really do have to catch the replay.
Yeah, you do. Because I got to tell you, Gary Wayne may be the most studied person that I've spoken to and about any one particular subject. He just can talk and talk and talk and talk, and he paints the most perfect picture for you, even though you have to get the understanding first. It is dense material that he brings to the table, but once you have the understanding, listen to him. I mean, you may want to listen to several of his interviews on different platforms and all that, because it is a lot.
I bet.
He knows so much.
I'm mad I missed it.
Yeah, and this was right after I had on the prophecy of the four riders, the quote-unquote four horsemen of the apocalypse.
I also missed?
Yes,
you
did.
Because I look confused, so I also missed that.
Yes, you did. So
I have no notes.
This was like back-to-back episodes about prophecy, basically, and then you guys will see what the other interviews
it wasn't
are
my
that
time
come
to
right
hear
after
it. So I guess my moment will come when I catch the replay.
Yeah, with
That'll
everybody
be my
else.
time to hear it. Yes.
Yeah, so probably next week.
So it's probably a good thing I missed it then.
Yeah. Well, hey, it is always good to hear from Gary Wayne. He really knows his stuff. He's author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. If anyone is unfamiliar with Gary Wayne, I highly recommend his book.
He was on the Valediction Roundtable?
No.
He wasn't one of those? He should be.
He was on the Fallen
He should
Angels
be on one of
Roundtable.
those.
Well, he was on the Fallen Angels Roundtable, the human race.
Yes.
He came in and he really rocked it there.
Also, the one I missed.
Yes, you weren't there for that
what
either.
the heck?
You
I got
weren't
a lot
meant to
of
meet
catching up
Gary
to
Wayne.
do. Yeah, not yet anyway. I guess when? Next week? When is this episode?
Yeah,
coming?
this will be on next week, next Tuesday.
Okay, so that's when I'll
Yeah, so a few days.
hear and all.
Yeah. I got to tell you, folks, there is so much knowledge in this episode. You may have to pause it and stop and think about things for a little while at times. I mean, there's so much information. There's going to be 4 episodes in a row of mine that are just going to absolutely blow your minds with our history and prophecy, where that may be leading. And this, the one before this was with Terry Wolf. And now this one's Gary Wayne. Yeah. And then we had Dan Unaki Dan. You were here for that one.
I was.
And then Ryan Alexander. And I got to tell you,
I missed
those 4, yes, you did.
Man.
So you missed 3 of the 4.
I know I missed some good interviews.
Yeah, man, I was I needed to decompress
I
after last
know.
night too. We'll get to
Last
that
night I
later,
barely talked to you.
but these 4 episodes in a row, man, I got to tell you, you guys are going to learn a lot with these 4. So, pause them and really take in the information. It's really solid information. You can paint a picture across the 4 different things. You guys are really going to enjoy it. Gary Wayne, he talks all about the Nephilim. He has 2 books actually coming out. He talks about the Nephilim, the Raphaim, the fallen angels. There's so much to it. There's just so much. And he comes on. We talk Tartaria as well, a little bit. Not maybe not as much as I would have liked to, but it was because we were covering so many different things already. So to go back, it wouldn't have made sense in the way that we talked about things. So you guys will see. It's a really fun episode. And Gary's a great guy. He's always willing to help people out. He'll send you documents if you hit him up on his website. Just ask him on the contact tab. Just say, hey, can I have this document you were talking about, and describe what document, and he'll send it to you. He said it'll take maybe 2 weeks for him to come across your email, but he'll send it. Gary's a really good guy, and he brings his receipts. We like having evidence here in order to
Yes.
build and establish a narrative. And
Sometimes there isn't always evidence, but when there is,
right,
it's a good thing.
right, and he filters everything through the Bible. He wants to stay on track with the Bible and see how the current events match up along with the bloodlines. He's very steady with the bloodlines. I mean, you can hear him on so many different podcasts, and he talks about it is maybe the same subjects over and over, but it's so deep and dense and so much to it that you got to hear the different sides of it when the different hosts will bring it out of him. He's like the Batman of Bibles, conspiracy theories. Gary Wayne, Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
I think that's all
I'm sad I missed it,
we're gonna do.
but I'll catch it when I need to.
Yes, you will catch it when you need to. It is
Mhm.
great fun to speak to these types of people that are so expert in their field of study that I'm just blown away after the conversation. And I gotta tell you, I am still blown away after, and I'll have to listen back too, just to make sure that I know I heard
Digested
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is one that I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
hearing
because my
again.
brain will get stuck on a word or a sentence, and then I won't even hear what comes after that for a while until my brain has fully processed, what I was questioning.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me have. All right. So I think we're all done here for the intro. Make sure you check out my website, emmanuelkingman.com. Hit me up for some energy work. Hit me up if you just want to chat. Send me an email. People have been emailing me lately, so that's pretty awesome that I've been talking to more and more people and just having good conversations with people. That's what it's all about, right? All right, make sure you do that. Make sure you stay tuned at the end of this episode for a preview of the next episode. And before we go to Gary, we are going to have a little visit from our sponsor here. So I want you guys to sit tight and check out our sponsor. Oh, and you guys can also check out the video on my YouTube channel as well if you want to go on there. So I'm going to put it on the screen here. Let me share my screen. And for everybody listening, you guys can check it out as well. All right, folks. There you have it. That's all right. So there is the sponsor.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah. So make sure you go check out our sponsor, the Bible. Make sure you go check them out and just give it a try. See what happens. All right. Without further ado, here is Gary Wayne. Hello, everybody. On today's episode, I have on a guest who made an appearance on my first roundtable discussion. He is so knowledgeable about the Bible, all sorts of beings that were living in our past, and he has clarity of the truth versus the lies through the use of Jesus Christ. Everybody, welcome Gary Wayne back to the show. Welcome to the show, Gary, and welcome back, I should say. How are you?
Well, and thank you for inviting me back. And I'm doing just fine, staying very, very busy. I'm trying to find time to get some more things back into my life. I haven't been that active on social media with everything that's going on and writing the book and the interviews and more research and everything that's involved in life. So I'm trying to make more time to get back into social media, and I'm kind of running behind on things, but better to be too busy than not busy enough. So I'm not going to complain. I'm very happy to be doing what I'm doing and happy to be back with you again today.
Yeah, well, I mean, you are one of the people that I realize is really got me to start looking at the Bible in a new way, filter conspiracy through the Bible, of all your research on the bloodlines and how it really shows that all the people who are in the secret societies of today, the ruling elite, as some may call them, they're actually related to the Old Testament biblical bloodlines that are talked about in there.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I just wanted to sort of underscore your first point there in terms of being able to look at things in a new light, because typically we get sort of set into our ways and how things have been presented to us. And when I came back to Jesus and to God, I came back in a contrarian sort of fashion. So I was going to look at everything and analyze everything that was in the Bible and decide for myself what it said and seek help if I needed help or other sources or whatever. And you know, what struck me very, very quickly was that what is currently being taught in the churches is so far from how much could be taught into the churches, and that the missing pieces are just so key, but that there's this almost organized suppression of teaching all the aspects of prehistory and prophecy. And so when you start talking about bloodlines, I mean, and people will say, you know, where is that in the Bible? I mean, you actually get in the verse about the Psalms of these bloodlines and these branches, and you get the branches of the terrible ones, and you get these things that make no sense to how typically the Old Testament is taught in churches. And then you can't make connections to, well, who are these princes and these mighty ones that are talked about in Revelation and aspects of the New Testament? How does that sort of all fit in? Because again, they haven't provided you any sort of context to that. And if you understand that all of the beast empires are connected, and they're always put together as being connected, whether it's Daniel 2 or Daniel 7 or Daniel 8 or Revelation 13 or Revelation 17, or any of the references to all of the prophets that are in the Bible, you'll notice that they are almost an extension of this seven-headed beast of empires that are presented in Revelation 17. And they're all ruled by this select line of kings, and nobody ever wants to discuss where did they get their divine right to rule from. Why do they say they are God's representative on the earth, and why are they so enamored with their own genealogies that they don't like to tell you where they take them back to? And yet the Bible doesn't touch on anything, and yet it's the core to understanding prophecy based on who those beast empires are. Because if you don't understand that, you're not going to be prepared for what's coming at you. if we are indeed the end times, and I think we are in the fig tree generation, but it's sort of that context. And so, you know, the book that I'm working on right now is going to be, I think, titled Prehistory and Prophecy. And I'm going to talk more about the giants in the Bible in a way that's never been done before, even though I got a lot in the Bible. There's just so much more. But the thing is that if you want to understand prophecy, you have to understand prehistory, because the context and the allegories and the consequences that have rolled forward down through the generations and will come to a culmination in the end time are all based on what happened in prehistory. So if you don't understand that, you have no idea what is going on, or how or why you could even put some chronology to Revelations, which most people say that you can't, because you haven't been given sort of keys to uncracking that chronology.
Right. And I think that if we have the mindset that, oh, just maybe some random person in the future, well, far off distance, is going to become something, like it makes it seem like it's an impossible thing, that just some random person will be the Antichrist, some random thing. But then when you start realizing, like, oh no, this is direct descendants are always the ones who are in this position, and there's direct descendants always in this position, it makes it very different.
It does. And you get sort of that understanding again, that in prophecy and in the book of Daniel and in Revelation, they work very, very well. So in Daniel 7 and 8, we learn about the 10 horns. Those are the 10 kings talked about in Revelation. And this little horn grows up between them. And he rises out of those 10 kings. That is an extension of the old Roman Empire. And all the other five before that. And so you have this one that's rising out, who's going to be the 8th empire, as Revelation 17 talks about, beginning at the abomination. So there is this intimate relationship there that we need to learn and sort of understand. And when you look at Daniel 2, you have these, and they're described as metallic empires in that prophecy. But what's interesting is you get towards the end of it, you get these descendants of these kings who are going to mix their seed with humans.
Right.
And that makes no sense unless you understand that the royals, the people who are descendants of the beast kings, they believe that they are above humans. They believe that they are descendants of the demigods, and that they are demigods given the divine right to rule, and that those descendants their ancestors are the demigods of the Nephilim before the flood and the Raphaim after the flood, who were procreated by the fallen angels, the sons of God, the watchers in Genesis 6:1-4. And so there has to be at least a relationship there between Antichrist and those bloodlines, and to present a pedigree that would fit with that prehistory and history as we've seen it ripple down both before and after the flood. I don't think, personally, my perspective, that Antichrist bloodline would go back to before the flood, unless it's an angel that starts his bloodline after the flood, who wasn't in the abyss before the flood but went thereafter for those crimes against creation. But so I think it's the descendants of the Raphaim, from being created from the Baalim, who probably went to the abyss as well, and those are the offspring gods as opposed to the parent gods before the flood. So I kind of look at, I can accept their genealogies that will go back through history and back to just after the flood, whether or not it's a recreation that I think of the Raphaim, who the Scythians are, who in polytheism would escape from Tartaria or the abyss, and that's how they show up. One way or another, they show up after the flood, and those are the genealogies that are the source to the royals even today.
Okay, and are you familiar with Jacob Israel on YouTube?
No, I am not.
Okay, so he's a guy who's very connected to God, and he's putting together things like in social, not social, but in pop culture, pop culture references through the Bible, and he's kind of like, where as you're going through the past, he's doing like current day stuff, and the way that all the different things that are happening now, it seems like they're trying to birth the Antichrist at this moment, with Little Nas X, being pregnant. There's many things, weird things going on with Kanye West and Marilyn Manson, Justin Bieber. There's a lot of weird stuff going on right now, where it seems like they may be trying to birth that little horn at this moment that you were just referencing.
Well, and if you look at some of the astrology presentations that were going on in the last couple of Decembers and the alignment, and so polytheism will rely on those types of signs as opposed to the signs of the Bible, right? There are two different kinds of signs that are already in play. So expect a little bit more of that. Also expect, and just so if people aren't aware of sort of how I come about prophecy, one of the things I do that I'm surprised isn't done more often is I don't relegate what Jesus said to be secondary. I put everything around what Jesus said, and that he gave us a chronology and not in a topographical or topical order, but in a chronology that has the abomination in the midpoint, just as he references Daniel. And that word then is used quite often when he's announcing another sort of event or a sign. And that's the Greek word to, which means then, thereafter, at that time, and then, going forward. So you get the exact words that gives you a chronology, and you get the midpoint measurement there. So it's pretty easy to understand what's going on in prophecy if you listen to what Jesus said. But all information and all other prophecies around what Jesus said, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, and if you do that, you find out he says that there's going to be many antichrists and not to be deceived. So we're going to be inundated. And we also get that, again, supported in the epistles of John, that there would be multiple antichrists. So we ought to expect that. And if you look at what the bloodlines are, there are many bloodlines. And they all will eventually go back to a little more limited number in the beginning after the flood. But you also have these bloodlines that are all around the world. So you have the Western bloodlines, you have the global bloodlines. And in most religions, you are going to have some sort of prophecy reference or prophecy guidance to their belief system, which suggests that they're looking for this God-like demigod avatar incarnation coming back in the end time. And it doesn't matter whether it's Lord Maitreya out of the Buddhism and Hindu belief, or it is the Mahdi out of the Shia sect of Islam, and you can go on and on and on. So they're all expecting their Messiah to come along, their demigod, their savior, and so are we. And so the bloodlines, they are like rivals, even though they directionally work together. It's kind of like that Highlander movie, if you remember that, where you have these hero figures, and you got to take the head, just like you would, kill a giant from the past, and you get their energy instead of drinking their blood. This is the quickening, just as you get the quickening talked about in the Bible. And so they're kind of mixing the metaphors. This is from the fairy version of it, which is all talking about the same core belief, but there can only be one. There can only be one antichrist that eventually rises to the top, that is going to rule the world for a short period of time. But from the polytheist belief is that the antichrist is going to set up this new millennium, this counterfeit millennium, and that only his family will be that royal bloodline going into that 1,000-year reign. And so all of the bloodlines want to be that family. And so you're going to get those rivals, and you're going to see very confusing things. And we need to be careful as Christians not to be pointing at every president that comes along as Antichrist, or this guy's Antichrist like Macron or somebody from Greece. And it's just an endless litany of apocalyptic misinformation, because we have to get the chronology right.
Right.
And we'll have to be patient, because we're going to get discredited.
Right.
And I think nobody's going to listen to us.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're exactly right on that. And I think what you just said was very important in the chronology. And we're at a time and place, especially conspiracy theories, that are everything is starting to come together and the pieces are starting to fit together. And all of a sudden, 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years, something like that, we have Tartaria comes along
Yeah,
and the mud floods. And
yeah,
I am of the thinking that there it could possibly have the second ending of the world as described in the Bible. The fire could could have happened in the late 1700s and throughout the 1800s with all the different mud floods, the different wars that were happening, the darkening of the sun, which we're told was a volcano explosion from a comet hitting. It kind of fits biblical prophecy of the second, how the first one was supposed to end with the flood and the second one was supposed to be through fire, and that maybe we're post that time period. I'm not too sure of anything really, but it's there's a lot of things that point to it. And you've really been studying the Tartaria stuff recently. So
yeah.
how do you
Well,
see Tartaria lining up with the Bible?
I think it's got a place and a frame of reference, and we'll need to be a little bit more aware of it. One of the things I would point to, and there's a lot of different views on prophecy, but I believe that the Bible isn't in contradiction. And I also believe that you don't ignore inconvenient Bible passages. Everything's got to fit, or you've got something wrong. And so we can't really be by an apocalypse of fire where all the world would be destroyed, as Jesus said, unless he came back. And he would have to have come back. If that were the case, then we would already seen his second coming, which we haven't. So we have to sort of align those things. And so we may get inclinations, we may get sort of like a sound sort of reverberating like echoes out of the past of the apocalypse's past that will be very similar to what they are in the end time, just as you have the birth pangs. So the birth pangs would be probably the best sort of analogy to this, that in the fig tree generation, that will not pass until all of those events and signs that Jesus predicted took place. All of them, not part of them, all of them, one generation.
Okay.
And right, so we need to understand that, and that those birth pangs are earthquakes, wars and rumors of war, pandemics, and pestilence all working together. And the time of sorrows is an allegory that comes out of the Old Testament for travail and for the period of birth. And then it's the birth pains that are going to get stronger, and as in the birth delivery process, the pregnancy process, they're going to quicken. So they're going to get larger. So these birth pangs are going to start to work together all at the same time and get stronger as you go. So you have to have all of them as well. And you also have to have, to be in the end time, you also have a universal government, and you have to have a universal religion. And you have these birth pangs that are going to get stronger, kind of like what we're starting to see perhaps with COVID as part of the pandemics, but we're going to need to see more of those other ones working together. By the time you get to the opening of the seals, you have the exact same catastrophes as in the birth pangs, because they're getting stronger. So much so that that some of the kings of the earth are actually going to think that this is the day of the Lord. It's not, but they're going to hide in caves like they will at the true day of the Lord and Armageddon. And this is at 25% destruction.
Right.
So they're increasing, but that's not the same level as the trumpets. The trumpets are 33% increasing. And then the wrath bowls, which come out in the last 3.5 years, ending with Armageddon, it would be all flesh, all life, all the earth destroyed, unless Jesus came back and shortened those days. And so we have to understand that we can look at events like Tartaria, but let's not supersede what we're doing with Tartaria to what prophecy is about. We'll want to look at Tartaria as who they might be in terms of the peoples that are mentioned in the Bible for the end time, and how they fit in prehistory as to who they and where they came from. So Tartaria actually has more than one sort of life to it. It has the more recent one that's kind of an extension of the Mongolian Empire. And as you say, gaining through a similarity and almost a kinness that's almost denied today through the connections of who the Mongols are and who the Russians are. That goes back to the Scythians, back into prehistory. And so you have that sort of recognition of this empire that is sort of dismissed from history, except for certain parts. But that doesn't mean that that was the end time world empire, right? Because it had really nothing to do with Jerusalem. And all prophecy, end time prophecy, surrounds Jerusalem. So if you understand that, and it has roots back to events at the time of the flood, and you understand there's a flood that separates the history, and that's why it's difficult for secular researchers to understand from their point of view, because they don't consider the flood being there. And there's a flood. So you have technology, civilizations rising, disappearing, and then re-rising again, and because of the flood. And the peoples that, you know, were very few became great, became few again. And so again, you have to understand there's two different ends of it. So the Tartarian Empire begins not at the flood, post-flood, the post-Diluvian epoch, even though it will reestablish itself again. It actually goes back to before the flood, to antediluvian times. And you know, there was tablets that were found in Wallachia, in Transylvania, in Romania, and they're dated, depending on who you want to date them to. Some say only 2,700 years, but that's, and they're Sumerian-like writing, and they're tablets, but other dating takes it back to as high as 5,500 years. So it can show you some of the variations you can get on carbon-14 dating. But without understanding Tartaria's history, both before and after the flood, from a biblical perspective, it doesn't matter to us whether it's 2,700 BC or 5,500 BC, because it's before the flood, right? And that the older date would predate the Sumerian writing by well over 1,000 years.
Right.
Which now turns the entire secular chronology upside down and just full of holes like Swiss cheese, in terms of how they don't fill in those holes, and they ignore anything that doesn't fit their preconceived theology, because it's guided by polytheism. And so we need to understand that when we're looking at secular information, we need to understand it's polytheism, even though the seculars don't realize they're being governed by the polytheists, and they're following polytheist doctrine. So we have these people that are before the flood. And again, that is the area where the Scythians lived, both before and after the flood. The Scythians are the people who escaped from Tartarus.
And that's hell.
Yeah, that's the abyss. And we actually get hell in the book of Peter, where it says hell and actually goes back to Tartarus. Only one time is Tartarus used in the original Greek, where it goes back. But you see that connection, and that's the prison that the gods were put into, and the demigods. So the rebellious Greek heroes, the earthly titans, as they're called, because Atlas was both a hero and a titan, and an offspring of Poseidon and Clymene. And understand that's a common understanding in polytheism, where you have the heavenly, let's say Anunnaki or the Igigi, and you have the and also called Watchers in Sumerian history, and you also have the earthly Anunnaki and Watchers, and those are the demigod offspring. So you have the titans of heaven, the titans of earth in Greek mythology, and you're going to find that that's common sort of understanding that you're going to need if you're going to understand the difference as to who the different types of beings and peoples that are being talked about. And so you have these giants somehow escaping Tartarus after the flood, who become the Scythians. This is the Tuatha Danu, the tribe of Anu. This is also the Tuatha De Danann. And they're all the same peoples. And the Tuatha De Danann are recorded both before and after the flood as well. Just as the Anunnaki are recorded both before and after the flood. It's just a matter of how do they show up? Are they recreated, or did they survive, or did they escape? But the polytheist Greek version is they escaped from Tartarus. I think that's the Raphaim recreation after the flood. And in my second book, I'll really walk through it. I make those connections in the first book and talk all about Scythians and the different tribes and the Tuatha Danann and how they link in with the Raphaim, but not in the same way. Even though I give it a lot of detail, it's going to get really biblical in the second book to really drill that down. So this is the group of people that are the same as the Aryans in the Marianu. And you're going to have a period where they're going to migrate up to the north through the Danube River. These are the blonde-haired, blue-eyed version of the Tuatha De Danann, just as most of the red-hair, hazel-eyed ones went to Scotland and England. Now notice those two colors of hair and colors of eyes, because it is one of those key sort of threads that run through prehistory and post-Diluvian history on peoples and names. And the Aryans are part of the Scythians as well, and part of the Greeks, and part of the Persians, and part of the people in Mesopotamia. There are several, I'm kind of tracking about 4 main branches of these ones after the flood, but they're all related and connected to the Horim as well, which is how I start to connect them back to the post-Diluvian giants. And the Horim would be spelled HRM, so people of Mount Hermon, and are part of the Raphaim.
Oh, wow.
And they had pale white skin. And Horim also goes back in Hebrew to the word white and white bread. And they had pale skin, just like the Aryans did, just like the Atlanteans did. And so red hair, hazel eyes were common, but they also had red hair and blue eyes as well. So you can get a mixing of the eyes in there. And these are the ones that are also related to the Raphaim, which are sort of the root sort of name for all the branches of the giants in the flood. And these are the same ones that would be grouped with the Cadmonim and the Kenazim and the Kenim. In Genesis 15, you have actually 10 mighty nations there before 3 of them sort of go to the east. And the Cadmonim are the peoples of the east, same as the Kenim are called the people of the east. And these would be sort of like the giants that would make up that area of Mesopotamia where Gilgamesh would come from, right? And, you know, he was 11 cubits. And as a royal cubit, that would make him just over 19 feet tall. And he was 4 cubits wide. And as a royal cubit, because he was a king of Uruk, he would have been 7 feet wide. So this is a monster, bigger than Og, who would have been somewhere between 12 and 15 feet tall. And his bed was as wide as Gilgamesh's was, but he'd be a little bit smaller. And he's considered the last of the Raphaim. And where I get that from, for people who may be reading the King James Version Bible, is the word giant. He's the last of the giants. And that's said 3 times in the Old Testament. That's the Hebrew word rapha for giant, and I am is the male plural. Nephilim only shows up 3 times, once in Genesis 6:4 and twice in Numbers 13:33, where you have the evil part of the report, the embellished part of the report, talking about the anakim as giants. And those 2 words for giants there is the word nephil and the I am male plural. The anakim aren't Nephilim. They were exaggerating because the Nephilim were larger than the Rephaim.
Oh, okay.
Before the flood, okay? Exaggerating it. And that testifies that the Israelites knew that the Nephilim were giants. But the anakim, as they're described, and the anakim kings that are described in the report by the loyal scouts that went in, are reporting people that are taller than Israel. That's not the anakim. That's the hybrids that intermarried with the Raphaim tribes that produced the Shazu or the Shemau. They're known by several different names, but they were about 6 to 9 feet tall, but the Raphaim were larger. So these were human Raphaim hybrids. The 3 kings that are mentioned are Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. And they are the Anakites. They're the anakim, as I like to call them.
Is that the
Keep term
Anunnaki?
right. That name is very closely related, but typically not.
Okay.
You don't get you get a phonetical similarity, but not necessarily an etymological connection, except that it means long neck, just as Og means long neck, and Og was a raphaim, and the last of the giants. But in Deuteronomy 2, the anakim are called giants, but that word is Rapha and Raphaim, just as the Horim are. Rapha and Raphaim, they're just like the Emim are. Everywhere it's used except for those giants, everywhere giant is used except for those 3 times in Numbers 13:33 twice, once in Genesis 6:4, where you've got nephilim, where giant goes back to Raphaim, like Goliath, who was 6 cubits and a span as a giant. And he had 4 other brothers, as we're told about it. David also had to kill in his mighty men, and that would have made him, because he was the king of Gath as a Gittite, and why David took 5 smooth stones, because he thought he might have to kill each king of the 5 kingdom, or the Pentapolis city-state country of the Philistines. He thought he might have to kill all 5 Rephaim kings that day, and so he didn't think he was going to miss. But Goliath would have been using, if he wasn't a king and wasn't part of the royal bloodlines, he would have been 9 feet 9 inches. But as a royal cubit, he would have been as big as 11 feet 3 inches, which would have been more than twice the size of the 5 to 5.5 foot average person of the Israelites at that time. And so I know I got off onto a stream here on the Horim, but I thought I'd throw out something I had to sort of support what I was talking about. But these are the people that are branching out from a biblical perspective to become the Scythians. And how you get there biblically is that the descendants of Japheth are moving into that Scythia area. And what's really interesting, either they changed their name or their name was changed to reflect their falling away from God, are descendants like Magog, right? And that sort of shows up with Gog from Magog in an end time war in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Gog doesn't show up in the Bible, only Magog does, but this is Gog of Magog. So Gog is this described as a giant when you take that back to Greek or Hebrew, and as an allegory for an end time antichrist, one of the many end time antichrists we were talking about earlier. So now when you're looking at, well, where does Magog and Gog come from with a name? If Gog isn't in there, but it's Gog of Magog in the end time prophecy, it's referring to some people or a bloodline. Well, the offspring of Iapetus, a Greek god, was Albion, which is an important one to remember as a giant as well, Magog and Gog. So I think when they were intermarrying with the Raphaim in Scythia, in the Black Sea area, they accepted the names of those giants. And it wasn't uncommon for that to happen. For example, King Saul, he actually, as an Israelite, takes his name from a Horim in the Dukes of Edom in Genesis 36. Which is kind of bizarre, but you get some of those names intermixing into Israelite history. And he was, and Saul probably wasn't his original name, as I write about in the first book. So it's more of a title and a meaning, but he was a head taller than all the Israelites. And they wanted a king like the other kings in the other nations, who were all Raphaim or Raphaim hybrids. They were giants and taller. And so that starts to make some sense for people. And so the Scythians then would have interbred with the descendants of Japheth, just as the Canaanites did with Raphaim, to create all the patriarchless nations in Genesis 10. And I make that statement that they're patriarchless because 9 of the 12, you don't get a patriarch. You just get listed as families, which means family, yes, it also can mean kind or a different species. And in all of the 70 nations in there, except for the 9 from Canaan, they have a patriarch that is listed. So Sidon and Heth are the sons of Canaan, but you don't get that as being explicitly said. There's one specific, and I think Rapha might be a patriarch of the Raphaim giants as well, and each of the tribes of Raphaim will have a patriarch. So we get one patriarch listed in the Bible. His name is Arba, that Hebron was named for, the city of Arba, Kiriath Arba, and he is the patriarch of the Anakites, the anakim. But his name isn't in the table of nations. We don't get giants. We don't get Rapha in the table of nations. We only get the descendants of Noah, who had a Noahite patriarch, father.
So why do you think that is, that they're not listed in there?
Because they weren't given in the inheritance, as Deuteronomy 32 tells us about the 70 patriarchs for the 70 nations, right? That are actually going to be governed by rebellious angels from the council of gods in Psalm 82, but they weren't given an inheritance. They are illegally created beings. The earth is for the descendants of Noah, humans, the descendants of Adam, not the descendants of, but they usurped those nations, just as, the gods were ruling over those nations. And so you have, as it lists out in Deuteronomy 32, you get the 70 nations that are listed as the number of the sons of Adam before the flood, same 70 nations, same human genealogies, and as the number of 70 as the sons of Israel, which Israel in some translations is in there, and that's a compound word that is listed before Israel's even created. So Israel's named after by a title name from Jacob to Israel, with this being a combination of Sarah and El, and for the ruling God Almighty is basically the name. So it's not talking about or the sons of God Almighty, which are talked about in Deuteronomy 32, not the sons of Israel that hasn't been born. That's not a contradiction. It becomes sort of true, but that's would be from more of a prophetic nature. But these are the sons of Jacob that are born in Egypt. And that matches perfectly with the 70 patriarchs that are listed in the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 and First Chronicles. And so when we look at all of that, then what we can look at is that giants were pushed out of the covenant land for the most part, just as they had also migrated out. So they had to go certain places. And so Scythia, being in their belief, being the descendants of, or the escapees of Tartarus, take their name of that, and they move into places like Russia and the Ukraine, but they also go and intermix with the Mongols, who aren't really connected to the Chinese. I know there's going to be some intermarriage that's going to be going on by geography, but the original ones are basically these Scythians that had moved out, which are the people of Tartarus. And the same with the Russians. They are the people of Magog and Gog, right? As they're going to show up in the Bible. And the Cadmonine are like the kings of the East as the descendants. So you've got these players that are showing up, if we sort of understand who they are. But, when you look at, and I'm just going to look at a few notes on here, but basically, Mongol comes from the Greek word great. And I'm just working off a fellow by the name of Dr. Johnson's research on it. I've not verified it, but what he says makes sense in terms of a lot of the things that were made up. And Mongols were Scythians from Russia and Siberia. And then, right? So that starts to make sense. And they're the same people as the Muscovites and the Cossacks. So this is that greater sort of empire that's being referred to from Siberia and Russia, to Mongolia and beyond. And so, even Marco Polo referred to them as the Mongols as Scythians. And what's really interesting, and you're going to like this, is Genghis Khan had red hair and hazel eyes,
Right.
according to his descriptions.
I actually talked to a man named Ryan Zem, who really breaks down the Mongols and Genghis Khan, and he talks about how Khan actually, one spelling of it means King of Kings. That Khan means king, and
yes,
that Genghis Khan actually fulfills some of the prophecy of the second coming, which may actually just be an antichrist. He feels like the first 4 seals being broken, and he listed them out. So, but he went around conquering in a violent physical way, and they ate their own. When they would kill their own, they would eat them, and that they were actually preaching Christianity and while doing this conquering. This is a very strange. This is not what we're taught.
It's not what we're taught. And the Cossacks were the Tartars, and the Tartars are the same thing as as members of the Tartarian Empire. And what's interesting is that King Og is a lot of times connected in as the King of Kings as well, along with Agag or Agag, part of the Amalekites, and understand that the Amalekim that are in Genesis 14 predate Timnah, a Horim, marrying Eliphaz, son of Esau, to create the Amalekite hybrid nation, because Timnah is the daughter of Seir, who is the chief of the Horim in the Mount Seir area, named after him. And Seir goes back to the root word satir, which is a devil goat god or a fallen degraded seraphim angel. And I mean, the connections just run so deep. But anyways, these Amalekim in Genesis 14 are another form of giant. And it's important to understand that the Amalekites and are connected in with the Kazites and all of these Aryan types of nations, and Tuatha De Danann nations are all the same name for the same types of people. But Agag, getting back on track, was the king that is listed in the time of the Exodus, who would be like a Son of Man type of figure, except that the Son of Man that is still sort of prophetic at that point of time would be much greater. And that's in Numbers, in the book of Numbers. And Agag is translated in the Septuagint. I'm not sure it's quite accurate, but possibly could be as Og, or as Gog, I mean.
Wow.
And so
is Genghis Khan as Gog is maybe?
Well, I think it's all sort of part of, in terms of how they understand those terms, King of Kings, because Genghis Khan was also known as Og Tartar.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And that there's a lot, and I've not been able to find evidence, but they suggest that his lineage goes back to King Og, but it could go back to, this Agag that's in the Amalekim bloodline. And Agag is a patronymic term, right? You get Agag that shows up more often. So it's a title like a Pharaoh or a Caesar. And that's what's important about that sort of King of Kings that is being talked about in the time of Balaam and the Exodus. And Agag shows up in the time of King Saul. So you get this patronymic period. And Agag is this, this sort of, as you get other accounts that are drawn in, he's this giant that's leading the Amalekites, and King Saul doesn't want to kill him. I guess he's quite, good looking and fair, pale skin, and but along comes Samuel, who takes care of it for Saul, and they kill him. And they're supposed to wipe out all of the Amalekites for all the horrible things they did in the Nephilim wars, or the Raphaim wars of the Exodus, beginning with the Amalekite war, where Israel wasn't even trained for war. They were unarmed nation of slaves, taking on one of the most powerful nations of that period, next to Egypt probably. And the descendants of Esau, who lost his birthright, his blessings, and the Messianic blessings, I think they were trying to wipe Israel from the face of the earth to inherit those blessings and present their dragon Raphaim bloodline Messiah. So Agag also shows up again as Haman, the Agagite, in the time of Esther. Agagite means the descendant or bloodline of Agag. And he's the one who's trying to wipe Judah from the face of the earth in the Persian Empire.
Wow.
And so this sort of goes on and on and on and on. So this Agag was an esteemed king of kings title that seems to be connected to, Genghis Khan through the Scythians, and them all being sort of those 4 different branches or so of giants that show up after the flood. I know that was a very long answer, but I was, as you start opening up these doors, I feel like I need to sort of give some context so people don't think I'm making things up at times. So,
yeah, no,
just kidding.
It's definitely a lot. I mean, it's a very dense thing. So let me ask you, do you think that maybe NBA players are somehow related to the raphaim? Like, was there some kind of mixture between the raphaim and the humans?
Oh, there was a significant intermixing of Raphaim. I mean, all of the Canaanite tribes were intermixed.
Yeah, because these NBA and NFL players, I mean, they're just monstrous, and they're so athletic, and all of the things that they represent. Are they descendants of that, do you think?
Well, they could be. I mean, we don't know. What we do know is there's bloodlines and there's genes. And so the gene of Isis is a gene that they're looking for in all of the DNA research and data banks and things that they're forming.
Really?
To find the gene of Isis. And Isis is, the post-Diluvian queen of heaven in Egypt and a Mother Earth figure.
Lady Liberty, right?
Yeah, and later Liberty. And that is the genes of the gods, right? That's what the allegory is meaning. That's what they're looking for the new age that they want, the new millennium that they want to introduce with Antichrist. They only want those people. So they're searching. And we also get the bloodlines that are created. Blood is created from the genes, right? And so if you want to understand the bloodlines and a possible connection with Rh negative, you have to understand that Rh negative means there's missing antigens. So if there's something missing in, let's say, the positive bloodline for humans, as the argument would go, then how could you add something by having something missing? That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for the genes that are added that make up the blood, right? They're manifested from the genes. You need to sort of understand that concept. And the Rh negative blood is very, very common amongst the royals. Too common.
Okay.
And, the most common Rh negative, which depending on the survey and research you're going to research, is 50 to 80% Basques have Rh negative. And the Basques, they actually call themselves in their mythology Homo Atlantis.
Really?
They believe that they, after the flood, started the post-Diluvian Egyptian Empire, the Mesopotamian Empire, the Scythian Empire, and migrated to northern Spain and southern France, that'll, in around the same period, and for the most part settled there. And that the bloodlines coming from the beast kings out of the Middle East that are settling into Europe is less pure than theirs. And that's why you had a Basque diaspora. You had a bloodline civil war where these newer bloodlines settling Europe eventually said, we're not going to allow the Basques to sort of supersede our hierarchy in our bloodlines, because the more pure and the most ennobled bloodlines you have is where you fit in the bloodline sort of hierarchy. So when we look at Rh negative blood, you get a high concentration into France, probably about 20%. But when you really look into it, it's mostly amongst the royals, the royales. AL is a transliteration for EL. So AL is in Baal.
Oh, wow.
Same word, right? So bloodlines of the royals, right? It's always interconnected. And so when we look at what people produce for manifestations of Rh negative blood, they tend to be more pale skin. They tend to have more hazel and blue eyes. They tend to be more intelligent. They tend to have more connections with the occult and spirituality and things like that. There's a whole host. And I got a document on this, people, and I'll connect that down back for the Psalms verse I was quoting earlier up in the show, where I lead the document off with. And I'll show you all the different traits that they have that's been documented in research. And I get people contacting me all the time and said, when you listed off all of the traits, it was like, I'm just going check, 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 right? So there's something to that DNA that's being passed on that produces the Rh negative bloodline that creates not a nephilim, but it creates manifestations of something that might have been there before. And I'm not saying people of Rh negative are raphaim, or they're not being able to be saved. I don't think when you inherit something innocently that you're going to be judged for that. That makes no sense to me. And even the sins of the father in old Israelite law only went to the 4th generation. So I see nothing biblically so I don't want to get people to get too concerned. So you have all of these science organizations and research organizations collecting information on blood. You have blood banks all over the world. You have genealogy collection all over the world. You have DNA collection all over the world. And this is all going into the banks so that they can identify who they want going into the new age and who they would want to just have for slaves, because they're going to reestablish the feudal system.
Wow, this is amazing. So, wow, you you said a lot in there. Yeah, and it really lines up with how I see the world. So you said something about the blonde hair, blue eyes, green hair, red hair, green eyes, that they're the same essentially, but they're like brothers essentially, right? That they come from the same place. So do you think, so I have two questions here for you. Do you think that the Nazis, quote unquote Nazis, were here before Nazi Germany, that maybe they were just descendants of these bloodlines? And secondly, it might tie into this, it might not, but how do you think that the giants actually died off if they were, much smarter and bigger and so on and so forth? How did they die off?
So what you get out of research in terms of the giants, and I think it also explains why they were intermarrying with humans, not only because of blood diseases that we see even today with that intermarriage. They prefer to intermarriage, but you get like Habsburg jaw and hemophiliac disease, Habsburgs being the royals.
Oh, wow.
Conveniently sort of named.
And it's named after them?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you just all you have to do is Google Habsburg jaw and you'll see a whole bunch of deformed faces and stuff like that. So,
oh my goodness.
They seem to have had to interbreed with humans because they seem to have had a fertility issue. So even with the raphaim of the Ugaritic texts, they're doing all of these after a certain period of time, fertility rituals to Baal and the various fertility goddesses, for Baal to come back and create new raphaim kings, because they're not able to reproduce. And if you get into some sort of non-scripture and loosely connected with scripture, let's say the Lost Book of King Og, it produces that same scenario, that they're not able to reproduce the way that they wanted. Or in the book of Lamech of Cain, that is specifically laid out that they had that fertility issue. And so there might be some truth to that, certainly with what we get in the Bible with them intermarrying with humans, let's say with the Canaanite races, where we get 9 patriarchless nations who are associated with giants. They were the hybrid giants. And
so the giants
I think they had to do that. I think they had to do that to reproduce.
Okay, so the giants already existed without the Canaanites then?
Yes.
So
they were there before. The Raphaim all the Raphaim nations had settled there previous to Genesis 10, because that happens after Babel, right? And so the
Okay.
giants are created shortly thereafter, and Nimrod becomes a mighty hunter and becomes Gibberim-like. And according to the Septuagint's version, again, not that I know it's got a lot of inaccuracies in it, actually says that Nimrod made his reputation by killing giants.
Yeah, that's what I'm familiar with. So
Yes, so they were there shortly after the flood, and were the Aboriginal nations, as they're described as you take it back in Strong's Concordance or Bible dictionaries, in the covenant land, that after Ham is born, and then the sons, they're going to go and live amongst them, right, and create these patriarchal sort of nations. So yeah, we get sort of a confirmation of that, of what is going on, and the Raphaim become the kings, right?
Okay. So when we're talking about in the Bible, when Cain kills Abel and then he's kicked out, he's sent out, and Cain is afraid or something to the effect that he's going to be killed by others, and then somehow he ends up with a wife and reproducing children.
Yeah.
If Adam and Eve were the first ones there, then how did that
How does
happen?
that happen? Well,
So
yeah,
were the giants here already?
Well, I will say no to that, although polytheism would say yes. Okay, so first of all, just so that people know that when Seth is born, Adam is 130 years old, and more sons and daughters are born thereafter. So
they're just not talked about.
Yeah, but there's this gap, right, between Cain and Abel and Seth. And so we don't know how long Adam and Eve were in Eden, but what we do know is that once we get the story of Abel and Cain, they're offering like first fruits, or supposed to be offering first fruits, but Cain doesn't. He just makes an offering, and that's why it's not as rejected, and that he's not favored by God, and then all sorts of things in his thinking start to go wayward, and he kills Abel, and then he leaves, right? So he goes east of Eden into Sumeria, right? And he is going to marry somebody immediately because he finds somebody. And then he's going to build a city, which he names after his first son, Enoch, not the same Enoch as son of Jared,
Which is the
same
book of
name.
Enoch.
Yeah, and so you have to keep those two names straight as well. And who are you building a city for, and where did she come from? Okay, so I said earlier in the show that I do not believe the Bible is in contradiction. So when you get the day 6 account of people who are made in multiple, male and female, and told they can eat of anything of the world, and of all the trees, and to mass produce, and then you get the Eden account where you have Adam created in singular. Sometime later, Eve is created. They can't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They're not spreading around and multiplying around the earth. They don't have sons and daughters until sometime after being ostracized, and a whole host of other details in terms of the chronology of things, in terms of what Adam is going through and doing to what's happening in day 6 is totally out of sync. It contradicts.
Okay. So are they two different creation stories?
So the only way I can reconcile it is two different creation stories. And those would be the people of day 6 that Cain is going to intermarry with, which then starts to fit nicely with your understanding of he is going to, become like a king over them, bring in the knowledge that he was taught by Adam, who was taught knowledge for civilization, crops, everything, because it's this huge garden that's more than a garden. It's got orchards in it. It's got crops. It's got rivers running through it. It's got animals. It's got farming, ranches, the whole bit. So there's a lot of knowledge that needs to be taught, but all used for good, until he eats from the tree of good and evil, and then no longer has access to the tree of life. So not a very good trade, but that's what they do. So as it goes in Masonic history, who takes their beginnings back to this and this knowledge that Adam was taught, and the gaining of knowledge of good and evil, that's taught to Cain, is taught to Enoch, that develops into 7 sacred sciences. This is the knowledge that they're going to be taking to the people they meet up in Samaria and or other places around the world, because in day 6 people went around the world, and in Masonic history you had 4 races back then. And so that's where the knowledge comes from. And then those are the daughters between the Canaanite marriage and whoever he marries, and the people that they're going to rule over and set up as kings are going to provide the daughters for the sons of God in Genesis 6.
Okay, so I just want to break this down to see if I have this clear. So the day 6 creation were people that maybe they weren't of the same creator as God, and
I didn't say that.
Okay, well, okay, I'm placing
yeah,
that in, but
yeah.
okay, but they're a different creation, I'll say, than Adam and Eve, and they worshipped Cain. He met one of them, he took one of them as a wife, and they worshipped him as a king because he brought all this knowledge to them.
Yes, that he worked with the gods on.
So then we're talking about somehow Adam and Eve are something, a different creation than the rest of the world.
They're a separate creation.
Okay.
So if you take the word man in day 6, that's the Hebrew word Adam, which is the same word and name used for Adam's creation. Yeah. So they're the same species. And I think that's where the 4 races come from. At least the other 3 races come from the people of day 6, perhaps, and maybe all 4, right? So Adam would have been of one of those races. And I think that's reproduced after the flood, the races, through the wives of the sons of Noah, because we get all 4 races.
Okay, so I have actually come across this in my research a little bit. What you're saying, the 2 different creations being, and I found somebody who suggests that it's 2 different creators. That so when it says Adam is different than Adam, it's only capitalized when it's talking about the one Adam, but it's not capitalized when it's talking about just man, which is Adam. And he's suggesting that El in the Bible may be referring to someone different than Yahweh. They may be 2 different creators.
Yeah. So let me say for the people that are listening, if you want a document on the day 6 versus Eden people, I have a document I can send you if you get hold of me through the website, and just ask for the document. I also have a chart that sort of lines up the differences on the verses. So get a hold of me on that. So you don't get the word El in Hebrew in Genesis 1. You get Elohim.
Right. Okay,
and that can either mean multiple gods, but some people would look at that as being the angels. But I'll debunk all of it here in a second. And in beginning of Genesis 2, you have Elohim, but by about verse, I think it's 5 to 8 in there, you get Lord God.
Right.
Instead of just Lord or God, you get Lord God. Now you get Yahweh Elohim.
Right. So are they is Lord God as a title of God, and is God just God?
Well, you're getting a separation, and I don't quite get into the theology of it in the document, but here's what's going on. So what we do know is when God spoke, everything is created. And when God speaks in days through 1 through 6 and 7, things are happening, right? What we also know is in John 1 is Jesus is sort of the oikotarian, the dwelling place of the soul and the body for the spirit of the word. He is the word made flesh. And in Colossians chapter 1, I think verse 16, the word made everything, just as is described in John 1. So when God speaks, that's the word, right?
Right.
And that's who created all things. So that would be in contradiction then to say then that God or the word, and in conjunction at God's command, the word created all things in Genesis 1, right? Because he
Right.
created all things, including the angels, right?
Right.
In Colossians. And so what's going on here is you have sort of the God Elohim as the superlative God that would include the Spirit of God, the Word of God, and God, the Father, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you have being introduced Yahweh or Jehovah Elohim in Genesis 2. And this is now going to be for the creation of Adam, who's going to receive the Spirit, right, for the soul and the body. And then through Cain and Adamites later, they're going to pass all of that to intermix with people of day 6 after Eden. So they're being created for a special sort of creation that is going to eventually produce Abraham, that's eventually going to produce Jacob, that's going to produce Judah, that is going to permit the word to be made flesh through the Holy Spirit into Mary, right, for his oikotarian, so they could interact in the world physically and to atone for all of the sins as the creator at God's command. So sort of everything sort of fits there. So it makes sense then that when you are looking at the words in the New Testament where it's talking about the first man, Adam, and this is the new Adam, Jesus, that is the beginning and the end. He's like the alpha omega of everything. So the creator in the beginning for a specific purpose of Adam to become the son of man and to be sacrificed. So that's why you have Jehovah or Yahweh Elohim in Genesis 2 as it gets inserted, after the first few verses. And so then you have to be careful as you're looking through the Bible when it's talking about God or Lord God and which word is it going back to, so that you know what is being talked about here. And anytime the word is involved, that is including God. So it's not out of sync with that, and including the Spirit of God, just as Jesus did everything separate from God on earth because there's distinct as the branch and being the servant of God. He's on earth, but he does everything with the Holy Spirit as well, including his resurrection and his quickening, right? Mm-hmm. So everything is in perfect sync. So I'll mention the differences between Elohim and Yahweh Elohim that's in Genesis 2 in those documents, but understand that my perspective and my biases is that the Bible isn't in contradiction.
Okay.
So you have to look at the details to say, okay, why is there that difference? Because that's something different going on with the creation of Adam.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting that it would say Lord God sometimes, and other times it says God. I think that maybe God was the first word for father, that maybe Adam referred to God, that's dad, essentially.
Yep. Yep.
And Lord would be like a title more so of maybe someone else.
Well, that is, as you understand it, as it's poorly translated out of Hebrew.
Okay.
Right, because it's clearly, it's clearly Yahweh, and it's clearly Elohim, if it was translated properly. And I think there's a sleight of hand there, because Lord comes from the Hebrew word Adon, and Adonai meaning my Lord. Adonai is the name that the Gnostics and the Freemasons assign the God of the Bible as a name.
Okay. The Gnostics and the Freemasons call Adonai the God of the Bible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, I have that in my book for people who want to read through my book and find it. It's in there, and I give the accounting of that. And so, I would prefer, just God in all of the places, just if you want to use some sort of word in place of Yahweh or Elohim. So when you roll forward now to Exodus and the burning bush, and that when Moses is being spoke to and he asked for what name should I use, it goes back to the word I am, which is the Hebrew word for Yahweh, it's the Hebrew word Haya, but it's the root word for, hopefully I can bring it up off the top of my memory now. For Yahweh.
Yeah, for Yah.
Yeah, well, Yah is the short version that
Right, the
is,
IA.
that is connected. So, and the people of Israel would have understood their language and how words are driven from another word and the meaning. So when he said, "I am that I am," they would know the root, the word Haya, which is the root word for Yahweh and Yah.
Okay. So where you said we are the fig tree generation, switching back to this a little bit, current times, we're the fig tree generation. Where does that align with prophecy? What do you think in your own research and speculation? Obviously, none of this is gospel. Of course, this is interpretation. So, anyone out there listening, obviously you do your own research into things,
Yep.
but where do you think that we are exactly in the
Sure.
timeline and the prophecy?
Yeah, and I would underline that, I'm not here to assert that everything that I say has, this level of
Well, you
superiority.
have a ton of
or authority.
evidence.
Yeah.
You have a ton of evidence to come to your conclusions.
And it's fine to agree to disagree, but I like to support what I'm saying so that people can think about that and adopt it in or not. And so the fig tree generation is part of two overarching signs that Jesus provided for the chronological signs that were before, right? So it comes afterwards. So all of those events he talked about before would be fulfilled in the fig tree generation. One that follows is it would also be like the days of Noah, which is the same words, even though it's coming out of Greek and then into English, as in Genesis 9:29, as in the days of Noah, which was 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. So we need to understand both sides of what happened, because it's more than just the godlessness and not expecting the apocalypse. It's about everything that happened in the days of Noah. And I think Jesus used those words explicitly. So the fig tree is important to understand. What does that mean, the fig tree? Why a fig tree generation? Well, in time of Jesus, when he was on earth and just before he was crucified, he actually killed a fig tree. He made the fig tree die. And after that, you start to get the prophecies of the destruction of Jerusalem and everything else in terms of the prophetic nature that he's talking about. So he killed the fig tree because he knew the people of Judah, the southern kingdom, the visible part of the Israelites, the lost tribes are still lost from the northern kingdom, who will awaken in the end time and will be called back and will be brought into the covenant. Different rabbit hole I won't go into now, but he knew the people of Judah would understand the symbolism to that, because in prophecy, Israel, the northern kingdom, is the vine and Judah is the fig tree. And so that when Jesus says, when you see the fig tree bloom, know that the season is at hand, right? The generation is at hand. Right. So when Judah takes back, visible Judah takes back the land of the covenant, it's going to start to bloom. But you have to make a decision then. Is it in 1947 when they declared their independence, or 1948 when they actually won it, or is it when they took Jerusalem? And typically all prophecy is centered around Jerusalem. And this fig tree was killed in Jerusalem. So I think taking possession of Jerusalem is the fig tree generation.
Okay.
And so if a generation then could be 40 years as a reign of a king that's talked about in the Bible. It could be 70 years as the Psalms talks about, or it could be 120 years of a generation that Genesis 6:3 limited life to, that's in the creation of the Nephilim narrative. And it's not the commission of Noah, because the math doesn't add up. And I don't believe the Bible makes math errors or contradicts itself, because the information that we get between the genealogy at the end of chapter 5 for Noah and his sons. You start immediately after that, Genesis 6:1 through 4, where 6:3 and the 120 years comes from the creation of the giants. And then you get Noah's story again and his commission and how the world had been corrupted. So what you get from that is that giants were a significant part of why the world became corrupted, and the flood's going to come. It's all part of the flood story. And so that's 100 years. Like, he's 600 years old when he goes on the flood. You get the math and you get the age. Like, it's 100 years, no matter how you do the math. Right? So it's not 120 years. That's how long life was limited to at that point in time going forward. And that's why the lives get shorter with the survivors after the flood.
Okay. So what do you think is going to take place in the near future? Is it going to be the second coming, or is it going to be so you're saying it could be up to 2067 would be 120 years, or
It could be
68?
it could be as long as that. That doesn't mean that it has to take to the end of the generation.
Okay.
So it's within that generation when all of these things will be fulfilled. So I think we're still in the birth pang period. We're not yet in the seal openings. And we talked about that earlier in the show and how things are getting stronger. And that we're seeing the first sort of shock waves of those birth pangs with the pandemic like COVID. And we should be expecting more pandemics. And I think we're starting to see the shape up of the wars that will be coming, with the way China is preparing to establish its sphere of influence as part of the 10 groups of nations or empires for the end time. You see Russia now with a weak president as well, loading up their army again on Ukraine, and they do want to take the Ukraine back because Putin comes from the Ukraine and from the Putyanin bloodline, even though Putin's name only shows up with his grandfather. Typically what happened in the Russian elite nobility class is that when they had offspring outside the marriage, they would give them only part of the name. And so the royal bloodlines that goes back to the original czars of the Ukraine and the Cossacks and the Scythians is the Putyanin.
Oh, wow. So it's all biblical.
Yeah, it's all biblical. So you see that starting to happen. I think we're going to have that expansion to saying, hey, we're not going to listen to the West. We want a larger role in the New World Order, or the Nephilim World Order, as I like to call it. Not that they're against the New World Order. They just want a larger position. And so I think we're going to start to see some of those wars, and we're going to see some of these other trading blocks or groups of nations start to push out on that as well. And so we're in the birth pangs period. And so if you look at things as being contrived catastrophes, that God is letting all of this happen through free choice because he's greater than free choice. And we look at wars as being self-inflicted human issues. A lot of times famine is, because that's usually because of disease or because of pollution or because of wars and other things that humans do. That's kind of like a manifestation, self-inflicted or contrived. And we look at COVID as being something that has been biologically engineered in a lab, which I think all the evidence is pointing towards. And there's no evidence from an evolutionary transition. And even the scientists that warned Fauci said there's no evidence that this could be evolutionary, and it doesn't follow the pattern of evolutionary, and there's no way it could have gone through a pangolin. And they've checked, I've heard anywhere between 60 to 100,000 animals, and they can find zero connections back to the COVID virus, that it would be transmitted that way. And that we know this research is ongoing. And we also know that China has a secondary military lab in Wuhan that was overlooking all of this. I'm not saying they spilled it intentionally, but it's a self-inflicted wound by the leak, right? And it was present during the military games that was in the October the year before, where they hid that, and then people went all over the world after the military games that spread it. So
Which
I
was
think we're going to
happening
see,
simultaneous to Event 201.
yeah. So these things are going to happen in greater intensity going forward, and then that's going to produce enough anarchy to have a universal religion start to step onto the playing field with the false prophets.
Are we talking alien, quote unquote alien?
That will be part of it. We're not told where the false prophets come from, but it's certainly a possibility. And some people can take false prophet back to the Greek, and also has to do with the dead. So are they people who come back from the dead, or from Hades, or from just disappeared?
Project
We don't know.
Bluebeam and 5G.
And also measure in the Marian apparitions as well with this, because I think it's going to play a bigger part. And in the Marian apparitions, they tend to initiate people with information and knowledge, and particularly one in Medjugorje that happened in the 90s, where 6 children were initiated for a number of years and were taught things by this Mary apparition. And that they were told that on a certain day that they know, they are to come out and to start giving 10 prophecies of apocalyptic doom, and that they'll do it one at a time to get the world to convert to one true religion.
Wow.
So they're going to predict a catastrophe, and then it'll happen, and they'll continue to say, if you don't convert,
They're going to keep happening.
They're going to keep happening. So I think they're going to scare people into the Babel syndrome. And with this other anarchy that's going on, and if they're predicting contrived catastrophes, they're behind causing the wars, the pandemics, everything. So they know that they're going to happen because they're false prophets. They're not real prophets. So if it happens, then these have to be contrived catastrophes. And so that will be creating all of this anarchy. You can just look at the anarchy we saw with this mild form of a pandemic,
right?
Let alone all the things working together, that there's going to be this void. And so that's going to create this turning to people who have solutions, and it's Babylon who controls the 10 King Empire. And in Revelation 17, she rides the beast of empires, as she did in all of the other beast empires.
Okay.
As the mystery religion, which
right.
Babylon is called. And Babylon goes back to Babel, the original post-Diluvian mystical religion that Nimrod imposed as the Antichrist archetype, and where the word Babylon goes back in Greek and into Hebrew to Babel. This is the Enochian mysticism developed by Enoch, son of Cain, for the knowledge that was part of the organizational structure of the Nephilim world order before the flood, and developed all of that knowledge. Passed on down to
John Dee and Edward Kelly.
Yeah, and was part of all of the beast religion, or all the beast kingdoms, whether or not it's the religion of Egypt, the mystical religion of Babylon, Persia, Greece, or Rome. That was the religion. And so this will be the religion of the end time. And she rides the empires. And so she becomes the catalyst to create them. And Antichrist in Daniel 9:27 will negotiate that contract. And that covenant will last for 7 years, which is the last 7 years. And at the midpoint is the abomination, when he finally rises to Antichrist. So
Okay.
we're working up to that. So the seals will open somewhere just after the start of the last 7 years, but I think a little bit before, so that when you get this conquering that's going on, you have this in the seal in Revelation 6, you have a crown and a bow, and conquering. So prevailing over something that's going on in these seals. So, and you also have, so when you have that word, a bow, that's not a weapon. Take that back to Greek, and it means a simple fabric.
Oh, okay.
And you take that back to its root word, and it is like something new. It's like a birth, or a birth pang, or being in sorrows. And so the toxin, which is the Greek word for the simple fabric, is like the fabric that the Greek and Roman emperors and gods wore. And then the crown is, and this is a birthing of that, right? As you take the word bow back, but it's also used, you need to understand that they're connected to the kings, they're connected to the fallen angels with that word bow, and to crown, which is a wreath crown. Not like a crown like Jesus wore on the crucifix, but like with two laurel leaves, like is depicted on the UN flag.
Greece.
Yeah, like in Greece, where they awarded those crowns to the Olympians. And
Wow.
and laurel is the word for Lorraine, where you have Anjou de Payon and Bouillon from, and the double cross of Lorraine comes out of that with the two bloodlines that represent the two crosses, and of course their descendants of Dagobert of the Merovingians, and that's going down another rabbit hole. But understand, these things are always connected, but this crown and this conquering, I think, is happening before the start of the last 7 years, before Antichrist starts to negotiate that contract. I think this is the rise of Babylon. And then we get another interesting verse in Revelation 2:9, which is tribulation will be for 10 days, right? And if you look at the last 7 years, that is a week of years. So a day is a year. And the time frames and the allegories for the days or the times or the amount of years or the amount of months, all in Revelation, all match what's being talked about in Daniel 9, Daniel 11, and Daniel 12, right? So there's a perfect symmetry there. So one might presume that tribulation will last for more than 7 years, 10 years. And we know there's the great tribulation after the midpoint, that where tribulation is shown as the tribulation not seen since the beginning of the world, which is huge, right? But we also get that in verse 9, as I recall, with the word affliction, where it's going to be talking about the tribulation of the saints and testifying. That word affliction goes back to the Greek word Philippi's, which is the same word for tribulation that produces as the same word. So you have the tribulation of the saints that are the ones in Revelation 7. So you have a tribulation of the saints in the first 3.5 years. You have a tribulation of the whole world that's even greater in the last 3.5 years. And yet you still have 3 years of tribulation before, probably when Babylon is rising and gaining power and coming to absolute power, so she can bring about the covenant and the 10 kings for the last 7 years.
So is that like right now?
Not quite yet. Starting to form.
Right,
you know,
right.
We have that world religion thing that's going on in Abu Dhabi, right? With the three, you have a mosque, you have a temple, and you have a church. But of course, the Christian church is not allowed to have a cross. So just you need to see a deifying of Jesus before the universal religion comes around as well. But it's moving in that sort of direction. So I think this other tribulation that's being talked about for 3 years, and will even start before, and we're starting to see those birth pangs of persecution now, right? Through part of the birth pangs, that's part of the Babylon tribulation. But the true Babylon tribulation is the first 3.5 years. And that's why when she's destroyed, it's because she has the blood of the saints on her.
Okay. So who is the whore of Babylon? Is this a person that we should be looking for, or is this a metaphor?
It's a metaphor. So typically the daughters of Babylon is an allegory out of the Old Testament, which are the offspring religions and other nations of Babel. Right.
Okay.
So you get this sort of female aspect, just as the mother goddess was the most important part of the worship in the dualism. So we need to see this god and goddess dualism come back. And the mother goddess, in a lot of aspects, was more powerful and influential, which is why we need to keep an eye on those Mary apparitions. Right. And you have other allegories which are as a prostitute, adultery. So I put this all in the book, and if people want to know where those allegories are, get a hold of the book, or just get a hold of me. I'll send you the information on it. But that is also an allegory that's used in the Old Testament for worshiping another god, right?
Okay.
And this is mystery Babylon, right? Mysterion is their Greek word for the mystical religions. And there's a whole bunch, every word that's used to describe is describing this mystical religion of Babel. So it's going to be that old polytheist religion that's going to take hold, and it's going to eat up and take, I think, a large superficial veneer look of Christianity, but they're going to de-deify Jesus so that you can have the deception of Antichrist saying he's the true Messiah, because he's the counterfeit Messiah, just as there will be a counterfeit Armageddon. And you are going to have to de-deify Jesus, and you're going to have it take over the Christian church. So it looks like a lamb, but talks like a dragon. Again, more imagery out of Revelations to sort of substantiate that, and takes over, and it's going to take over this universal religion, beginning with Roman Catholicism, which I think is the reference to Babylon being called a city 9 times between Revelation 14, 17, and 18. And that's the 7 hills and the 7 kings. There's 2. It doesn't say or, it says and. So it's the 7 hills she sits on. I think those are the 7 hills of Rome, not Vatican Hill. Vatican Hill was on the outside of the 7 ancient hills that formed the Roman Empire. But Vatican Hill was a sister hill and a church of the Sibylline and Sibylline prophecies and the mother goddess. I'm trying to think, it's not Pergamum. It's there's one of the hills named P, that where the Sibylline prophecies were originally set up on. And so I think what it's saying is that it's going to be inside the old sort of city, relocated as its center, and that this is the city of Rome that is going to be home to Babylon, not home to the new religion that Antichrist introduces when he takes power, because in Revelation 17, we're clearly told that not only do the 10 kings hand the power over to Antichrist for an hour, but as part of the bargain to destroy Babylon, which Babylon is destroyed. And then we also understand that Antichrist will set up a new God, as Daniel 11 talks about, and exalt himself, just as 2 Thessalonians 2:4 talks about. And same chronology is presented in Jesus's oration of the signs, by the way, and that Antichrist sets himself up to be God in the temple, right? So that's going to be where that new religion of Antichrist reigns from.
So
as
final
a
question.
Religious basis. Yep.
So final question, is it going to be obvious to everyone, or is this going to be some kind of thing that's kept secret from the world, or is it going to be a people, are they so indoctrinated that they'll just go along with it as if it is really happening?
Indoctrinated and shell-shocked will be the combination. And so they'll be looking for peace and safety from anybody, which Antichrist will ride to power on at the midpoint of the last 7 years, and including a counterfeit Armageddon. He counterfeits the resurrection in Revelation 13 as well. So he's going to counterfeit,
give them power.
Yeah, and he has a mortal head wound. Right. So everything, he has to counterfeit everything that's been prophesied about Jesus. So look for that. That's why he needs time to rise to power, right? After negotiating the covenant. And the counterfeit war is the war of Revelation 9. It's the 200 million man army that everybody thinks is Armageddon, right? And if you look at it, those beasts that are being described in the war are different than the scorpion beings in Revelation 9 that are coming out, right? And they are the same types of creatures in war that are described in Joel 1 and 2. That is talking about the day of the Lord is coming, and there's this war. and it's the greatest army that's ever seen before in Joel 1 and 2. But it's not Armageddon that's talked about in Joel 3. It's the Revelation 9. It's the counterfeit Armageddon. And Ezekiel 38 and 39 is that same war.
Okay.
And so what Antichrist does in when this war is going on, he's going to take credit for winning that war instead of God defending them, as what Scripture tells us. And in Daniel 11 and then in Luke 21, Antichrist moves his armies to surround Jerusalem after that war. And then the abomination sets up, right? He's the one who takes credit for the war, counterfeit Armageddon. I'm going to offer peace and safety. And people are going to follow him, and they're going to say, who was like the beast, right?
Right. So they're just going to scare everybody into, wanting peace and love.
Well, and you've got the false prophet who is the counterfeit Elijah, who's performing miracles for Antichrist, and they will have de-deified Jesus as dying on the cross. A prophet, they'll say he'll be like Buddha, he'll be like Confucius, he'll be like Muhammad in this new mystical universal religion, but not the word of God, and that he didn't resurrect back. So they're going to have to de-deify Jesus. And so those things are all going to be counterfeited, so much so, and Jesus warns us about this, about the many antichrists, and don't be deceived, that even the elect will be deceived if that were possible. And he says it is possible that they will be deceived.
Wow. So it sounds like people won't know what's going on, but they're going to be aware that there's something happening in the world. It's not going to be like it is now, where there's still, there's people holding on to saying, let's go back to things as they were normal. It's going to be more blatant and more in your face that there's change is happening.
Change is happening. This is the way that has to go for forward, or we're going to destroy ourselves from the face of the earth. Just as they're talking about with all apocalyptic globalist movements today, it's always this, it's whether it's overpopulation, whether or not it's pollution, whatever the issue is we need to come together lest we destroy ourselves from the face of the world. That, of course, the false prophets will also be out there sort of emphasizing as well, and also throw in there this whole confusion about aliens being introduced to us, right? That will be represented differently than who they are, because they're going to be offspring of the fallen angels, and they're going to be fallen angels, right? So, but they have to be presented in a way to deceive, right? And
are they going to be the blonde hair, blue-eyed, white-skinned beings? Maybe.
I think so. I think, but maybe not in the way that people think. But I do know is you have to have oikatarians for the bodiless spirits of the demons, and for the demons who are the terrible ones, the terrible branch on the earth, as Isaiah and Ezekiel 32 talks about. And in Ezekiel 32, it specifically says, these are the ones locked in the cells on the sides of the abyss, because they did the terrible things to humans while they were on earth, and they were slain. And they're talking to Pharaoh in this prophecy. So they're going to need a body.
Right.
So they need an oikatarian. They need a soul and a body to interact in the world. So my thinking is they're going to give them some sort of cloned oikatarian body for them to
a biological mannequin, so to speak.
Yes, whether it's added with transhumanism and whatever else, doesn't really matter, but it probably will reflect kind of what they looked like and how they were shining people. They glowed, just as they're sort of represented in the Stargate series with them shining from their eyes. It's kind of like that, right? So expect them to be shining beings as well. So I expect they're going to be here and interacting. It's just what form are they going to take? And there could be ones that, the angels had put in stasis or somehow protected or reproduced again. I mean, there's nothing to say that fallen angels who weren't sent to the abyss because there's both. There's ones in the abyss who are impassioned and the worst of the angels, just like there's demons that aren't in the abyss, like Jesus encountered. And those ones could easily, if they wanted to violate the laws of creation again, going into the end time, they could create these giants, right? And we don't know how long the pregnancy was for these things. They could be born fairly quickly and, raised very quickly, or they've been being raised in secret
Right.
in this last generation. I mean, we don't know, but I expect that they're going to be part of it. We know their bloodlines are going to be part of it for sure. And then there you get that interesting passage out of the Beast Empires where they're going to be mixing with human seed. Is that the descendants of the Raphaim, or is that pure giants or pure Nephilim or pure Raphaim? Hard to know.
Wow, this is, you've given me a lot to think about here, and I'm going to have to re-listen to this episode a few times to make sure that I got it all straight, because you bring in a massive field of research, and it can be very dense if someone isn't familiar with it. They have to wait, what's this? Let me stop and pause. So I'm familiar with most of what you talked about, but it's still, there's so much to this that you really got to study it, and you got to take your time through all of the pieces.
And try and connect the dots. And that's, when I give a lot of information, I want people to start thinking about connecting things, because everything's connected in terms of what's going on in a world that the fallen angels run with their descendants of their offspring, who have been the elite, the nobility class all throughout our history, from early on, from the 6th generation into the flood, and then almost immediately thereafter the flood. By the time the first new monotheist shows up after Noah and his immediate family, it's Abraham, which is just a little over 300 years after the flood, and he leaves Mesopotamia, Shinar, Sumer, where Nimrod intermarried with the giants, and he goes into the land of the Raphaim at that time, all by himself as the single monotheist in the world, to create the nation of hope. I mean, this whole world has always been dominated by the Nephilim world order and that feudal system that they have controlled throughout, and which is why they want now, because they're on the edge of globalism, to make sure the West goes back to the feudal system. They're not interested in raising the standard of living around the world. They want to bring our standard of living back down to the slave class, and the feudal system, and only the bloodline elites and the nobility elite and the oligarchs will be the ones really benefiting in the new world, just as communism worked the same way and China works the same way. And you'd have a very, very small sort of free enterprise class of small businesses. And again, you can see the results of COVID. Who did it hurt? Not the oligarchs. It hurt the individual, mom and pop shops.
Right. Wow. So I guess everybody be on the look, really study the Bible. And, being someone who I was brought up, quote unquote, Christian, but I didn't go to church. I went to Sunday school here and there for a few years of my life when I was very young. I didn't know much about it, but coming to all of this stuff through conspiracies, through spirituality, and now coming to the realization that the Bible is very accurate, and is if you filter everything through that the world makes more sense than anything else. What really baffles my mind in how everything operates is, if the Bible is being preached the proper way, that there's no doubt that anybody could be someone who studies the Bible without realizing that, Satan is running the world and it is his minions. So of course, when we say that there's satanic cults running the world, that the mainstream media just laughs it off. But if you're actually studying the Bible, then that makes total sense.
Yeah. Well, and the media knows this.
Right. They're a part of it.
They're part of it. Yeah. So, and if you think that the seminary schools weren't taken over,
right,
and why they're not teaching it, you're wrong, because it answers why they don't teach prehistory and they don't teach prophecy.
Right.
And it's why the church leaders did not stand up in the time of COVID for their flocks.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Satan and the fallen angels are running this world, and it explains everything. And if you just
Yes.
read the Bible and include the Book of Enoch in that as well, and several other, the Book of Esdras, and so on, those biblical types of books, if you read it in that context, then all of the conspiracies make sense. All the spirituality makes sense. All of the different things that I've studied, it all comes together in the Bible, and it's quite amazing. So I want to thank you so much for coming on, Gary. This was one of my favorite conversations. I mean, I learned so much, and I can't wait to listen back and learn some more. Do you want to tell my audience where they can buy your book, where they can find you on social media?
Sure.
And also, you are writing a new book, right?
I am. I'm doing a sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy, and then I have another one that's more prophetic. That's going to be on Second Exodus and how that fits in.
So you're writing two new books.
I'm writing 2 books, yes.
Okay.
But it'll be the sequel to Gen 6 that comes out hopefully next year. I'm getting close to getting it done. So, and that's going to be more Bible centered. So it's going to give you all the information on the angels. It's going to give you all the information on the giants and so much more. And I'm calling it Prehistory and Prophecy, the Genesis Conspiracy Part 2. So if you want to understand how prehistory mixes with prophecy, this is going to be a book that's going to help you sort of connect the dots so you can understand who the beast kingdoms are. For example, you just have to know that information in terms of who makes up the beast kingdoms. So you can get a hold of me through the Genesis6conspiracy.com, www.genesis6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. On that website, you have several icons to go through the website. One of them is contact the author. So if you want a document on the Rh negative blood, or we're talking about Daniel 2, or some of the other topics that we were talking about, I have a lot of documents. Just ask for the topic that you're looking for, and I'll send you that document. Or if you want to ask me a question, it may take 2 weeks for me to get back to you, but I will get back to you. Ask me a question through that. You can also get a hold of me through Facebook. Best way is through Messenger. Just send me a message. And if you want to buy my book, you can buy a signed copy off of the website by clicking on Buy Now, Buy from Author. If you wanted to get the Kindle version, you can click over to Amazon from that buy page to the Kindle version to buy from Amazon, or you can click over to amazon.com or amazon.ca or barnesandnoble.com. Also available on most online bookstores. And if you wanted to support your local bookstore and order it from them, they may not have it on the shelf, but the book is distributed through Bookmasters and they can order it in from there. And Bookmasters is located in Pennsylvania, who supply all the bookstores around North America. And if you want to get a better feel for what the book looks like, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters on the website. You can read through that and get a good feel for whether or not the book is for you or not. And if not, just look through the table of contents, and I think that's going to catch your curiosity.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I have a copy of your book. As I said before on the roundtable to you, that I heard you, I believe, on the confessionals with Tony Merkel, and you're talking about Genesis 6. I immediately bought it. I've read through most of it. I haven't finished it yet, but now with these new eyes, I'm glad I didn't, so that I can go back and reread it with under the new context that I now have in my mind. And it is a phenomenal book, and I highly recommend it for anyone out there who's just getting into giants or fallen angels, that type of thing. It really breaks it down in a way that you can understand. So Gary, we want to thank you so much again, and everybody, we will talk to you guys later.